Ho 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 everyone, welcome to episode 43 of the Drunken Boxing Podcast, this month not coming to you from the Middle Kingdom, as I am visiting sunny South Africa at the moment. I travelled out of Beijing for the first time since the before times, pre-COVID, and managed to catch the old bugger on my way out. I have recovered, and am slowly getting back into the swing of things, but this is why things have been a bit slow on the Mushin martial culture front. Well, it is the festive season, so it's a good a time as any to rest up a bit and kick things into a lower gear as well. So I hope you're all having a good build up to the festive season yourselves as well. With that, there is not much to report with regards to new content on the Mushin Martial Culture YouTube channel since the release of the last episode of the Drunken Boxing Podcast, but I will be continuing to release the story of Bagua Zhang soon, as well as some other goodies for you guys to enjoy. So keep an eye out for those. In other news, I am currently running a festive season special on all merchandise at the Teespring Mushin Martial Culture store. By using the code XMUSMUSHIN, one word, at checkout, you can get a 10% discount on any and all items purchased from the store. This special will run until the end of December. As always, purchasing some Mushin Martial Culture merchandise is one way to support this podcast, as well as my endeavors on the Mushin Martial Culture YouTube channel. Last month, I released a Bagua-themed tee, which features images of the Bagua Zhang applications from Yan Dehua's 1936 manual. This release features a high-quality sublimated print, which will last forever. Over the next few months, I will be releasing many of my most popular designs from my store in a sublimated option. While these are more expensive than a standard print, the quality of the print and the fact that it lasts makes it worthwhile. So go on and get yourself something to represent these wonderful arts, or as a gift for a friend, and use the promo code for that 10% discount. Once again, the promo code is XMUSMUSHIN, and the store can be found on Teespring at the link listed here and in the show notes. Another way to support my work is through Patreon. There are general support tiers through which you can do just that, and any and all support is highly appreciated. Additionally, there is also a third tier, the Huajin tier, in which you can study the arts of Xingyi and Bagua Zhang in depth. There is already a vast library of released lesson videos for both Xingyi, Bagua Zhang, as well as their related Neigong, skill-building practices, etc. So if you're interested in learning Xingyi or Bagua Zhang, give the course a try. For example, one of the series of lessons being currently introduced are the Liang-style Bagua Zhang China methods. These are crucial aspects to the application of Liang-style Bagua Zhang, and many of the in-depth details shown in the program have not been presented previously in this manner. The Patreon site may be found at patreon.com/Mushin Martial Culture. Okay, let's get into today's podcast. My guest today is Geoff Sweeting, who hails all the way from Brisbane in Australia. Geoff Sweeting began his study of the arts of Xingyi and Bagua Zhang in Perth, and following this he moved to Brisbane. He then achieved his qualifications in acupuncture and herbal medicine, and then he travelled to China to further his studies in both Chinese medicine as well as the martial arts. While in Guangxi province, he studied Bagua Zhang and Taijiquan. He then traveled to Beijing to find the roots of his arts, and there he began studying with Wang Tong, who is one of Li Ziming's original 8 disciples, and a Xingyi disciple of Sun Fenglin. Incidentally, my own Shifu, Di Guoyong, is also one of Li Ziming's original 8 disciples, and Wang Tong is my Shibo, or martial uncle. So I was very pleased to finally get in contact with Geoff Sweeting, as we are martial brethren, and it always makes me happy to see the Liang-style arts represented and spread outside of China, and Geoff is an excellent representative who has not only absorbed the art, but built on them in a productive and functional manner. To that end, he has developed Silentium Wrestling, which is a new approach to the functional and practical study and application of these skills in a combative tradition. In addition to these arts, Geoff also studies wrestling, Judo and BJJ under Professor Jason Miller. Geoff Sweeting may be contacted through the links in the show description. But let's get right into it. I give you Geoff Sweeting. Okay, welcome to the Drunken Boxing Podcast. Geoff Sweeting, happy we're getting to do this. How are you doing over there?
I'm going really well, Byron. Thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are things down in Brisbane?
Actually, of course, gotten really hot. We've had heaps of rain, and now it's really humid and hot. It's pretty stifling at the moment.
Yeah, you guys are going into summer though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we get a lot of rain in summer here as well.
And you get flooding down there too, don't you?
We've had heaps of flooding, and there's supposed to be a pretty pretty bad season for it coming up as well.
Oh no,
it's been bad in Victoria. You might have seen it on the news over there.
I have. That's exactly what I was seeing recently.
Mm.
My dad actually lives in Brisbane, so my dad's side of the family is all there. I've been there before, but I haven't been for the last few years. Planning to come through sometime soon again when maybe China decides to open its borders before the end of the century.
Hope so, mate. You'll have to come and have a catch up in Brisbane together. That'd be fantastic if you can.
That'll be great. Well, let's get into, because the listeners probably don't know much about who I'm talking to, so maybe you can give a brief introduction. It doesn't have to be brief. I don't know why I said brief. A general introduction of yourself and your background.
Sure. How far back did you want me to go? All the way back from origins?
Yeah, basically just after birth. as far back as you want.
Now, so it's going to be a pretty long podcast, mate, if we start back there. Yeah, I'm originally from Perth in Western Australia. I now, of course, live in Brisbane, but I've been here for over 25 years, 27 years or more. But yeah, I'm Xingyi and Bagua Zhang practitioner and instructor over here. That's part of, been doing that for almost 30 years. And I'm a teacher under Wang Tong in Beijing.
Right. Who's my martial uncle. So we're actually cousins, martial cousins.
Oh, fantastic. See, we're related.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually surprised to see that there were some of Wang Tong's disciples out there in Australia. I mean, I'd heard that he had taught foreign people, but I'd never really been in contact with any of them. So I was quite pleasantly surprised to get in contact with you and your student Dan Hall as well, who helped facilitate this connection. So I was really pleased to see that there's some Liang family Bagua from my direct family. I mean, as opposed to distant lines of Liang over there. So that's great. How did you get into all of that?
So you dropped off.
Oh, I was saying
again there.
It's a bit odd. I was saying, how did you get into all of the Bagua and the training? Your proverbial origin story. Yeah,
sure. When I was a kid, I grew up. Obviously, I said in Perth in Western Australia. Actually, had a family member who was a martial arts practitioner. He was a Golden Gloves boxer, and then he got into karate, and then he got into the Kung Fu and Chinese styles. And he was a very early pioneer in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And so I sort of grew up with the ideas, getting acupuncture as a kid.
Oh, wow.
Had a very early exposure to TCM and also to Kung Fu and martial arts through a family member. He was always doing cool tricks on us and doing... we used to line up as kids, we'd holding the cushions on our chest, and he'd do the 1-inch punch and send us all flying back over the room, and we'd all line up again and again, and he just keeps sending us back over and over.
Well, you know what they say, it's not actually Christmas until somebody gives somebody a 1-inch punch. So
that's right. Well, that was every Christmas, a lot of Christmases when we were young, so that was good.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. So that was
exactly right through the whole nervous system over and over again. But so I had that very early exposure, and I had I've got an older brother who's 5 years older than me, and he, was into Bruce Lee and all that, as everybody was in the late 70s and early 80s, and he did a little bit of training as well, and so I sort of course wanted to follow on with him, and always had an interest there. Had Bruce Lee posters on the wall as a kid and everything.
Yeah.
And then got into karate, of course, because the Karate Kid boom.
Right.
That movie was a huge, I didn't want to do the Chinese stuff. I wanted to do the karate like probably every other 11 or 12-year-old, whatever I was at the time, kid did. So I did Goju-Ryu.
Right.
For a couple of years. And that was pretty good. Then sort of fell off from martial arts for a while, and then got back into training again, probably in the very early 90s. And again, I just kind of fell into Xingyi when I wasn't really, I wasn't even aware that there was in so-called internal martial arts versus external martial arts.
Right.
I just had this idea. I'd done Japanese martial arts before. Now I'm going to do the Chinese ones.
Well, it's interesting that you got into Xingyi, because usually, I mean, in the West, it's not one of, and it definitely at that time, it wasn't one of the more well-known or exposed styles. I mean, you would see Southern styles and Tai Chi. There's like the majority of it. So it's quite interesting that you had exposure to Xingyi.
Yeah, we had a Xingyi Quan. We had the 1968, I think it was, or 69 version of Robert W. Smith's Xingyi book in the house. We had that for, my brother had it, and I think my uncle had given it or lent it to me, and it had been in our house. So it's got all that advice from the masters and everything in the back. So I often read that, unless my brother beat me up going into his room to get the book. But I had that there. And yeah, my uncle had ended up going to Taiwan and then to China. And so he had gotten into Xingyi Quan, and he thought that because he was a boxer, he thought the hard hitting in Xingyi Quan was the way to go, I guess. And so it was really through him, the family member. I didn't even really know per se, the differences between a lot of the different martial arts. To me, I was either going to, I think in Perth, I was either going to be doing Wing Chun or training with my family member, my uncle. So he'd started up classes again. He'd had a break for a while. And so I just contacted him and said, I want to get back into training. So
that's actually a valid point about the boxing analogy to Xingyi, because I'm pretty sure the first exposure to Xingyi by Westerners when they came either to China or Taiwan way back in the day, they must have immediately thought, oh, this is some form of Chinese boxing because of the relative lack of use of kicks.
Kicks, yeah.
And the very straightforward methods of punching with, a lot of power generation. I'm sure they would have immediately thought, oh, this must be some form of Chinese kind of boxing, in their minds, Western boxing.
For sure. And it's probably scandalous to say, but it looks pretty clear for the research that I've done over the last kind of 28, 29 years. The refinement of Xingyi Liuhe Chuan, to me, to those low postures and animal forms and big commitments with massive deep steps in, whole body commitment, whole body power. And then you get that stand up in a long guard from Xingyi Chuan, and that's in that 1800s. To me, it looks like the influence of Western old style boxing, where they had, like Sullivan, all that had the long guard, had the long front hand and the back short hand. Right. And they had a very Santee looking stance. So to me, I think,
you think there was influence there?
I think there is a boxing influence there that helps refine from Xingyi, the old styles, and refines it up into that 5 element style, and having 5 punches as well. And Western boxing generally has about 5 punches. It's interesting.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
There's definitely something to be observed there. I've also thought about that over the years, but I've also, over the years, when you look at other northern styles as well, classical styles, you find a very similar long arm stance. For example, in Fanzichuan.
Right.
And even they hold their, in Fanzichuan, you'll find it sometimes with the center of the fist slightly turned upwards, very similar to those old long arm like boxing stances, which were pre-gloved up kind of modern boxing rules. And there's a specific reason, and that's why I say this, is because that's a natural position when you don't have gloves on. These are what people don't really
you see realize. MMA people doing it recently. You see UFC fighters going back to that again, pushing back, painting back, getting that ward off hand. You see that very strongly again.
Exactly, because when you're wearing pillowcases on your fists, I mean, you just need to cover up, and there's very little chance of that gloved up fist going through a guard, through the holes in a guard. So you can just cover up at a very close range, and you'd be pretty safe. But when you don't wear gloves, there's a lot of holes that can be exploited, and they get exploited very quickly. So the safest bet is to extend the guard, to try to deal with an attack at a longer range before it has a chance to come into those holes and and hit you.
Absolutely.
So I agree that there could be some crossover with boxing influence, but it could also just be a natural progression of what's logical with
True. Good boxing's good boxing.
Exactly.
Human body, 4 limbs, same. There's only so many ways we're going to be able to move and respond for sure.
Yeah, that's why I find it, it's something that I think martial artists, we do sometimes out of love for our particular art, specific art, but also sometimes out of ignorance. We don't realize that humans have been fighting since the dawn of time. So to think that that it's going to be chalk and cheese so different from one place to the other is a little bit silly, because humans, the only reason we exist up until today is because we've got ingenious minds and we're able to use them in correct, logical, effective manners. So it makes sense that two completely disconnected humans and cultures will come to the same conclusion.
Absolutely. And as you know, that's the spirit of Xingyi.
Right.
Yi is the weapon. The humans can't spit venom or don't have claws, but we have a brain.
Yep.
And that's the kind of secret of Xingyi.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Able to that's the greatest weapon of all.
Well, the idea for the change of the name from Xin, with heart, and Yi to Xing, which is shape, and Yi, there's some connection between heart, Xin, and Yi, intent, because generally in Chinese they might think that if you explain it in a very rudimentary way, it means just the mind or something. But actually, there is a difference between Xin, which is the emotional mind, and Yi, which is the cognitive mind, right? So the one...
That's exactly right.
And that change in the name was actually to kind of highlight the cognitive human side of the mind over, the emotional mind. But actually, the one drives the other. So you can get completely angry with something and just react in a very uncontrolled manner, or you can take that and then funnel it with intent in a specific way. It's usually more effective. So
that's exactly right, and that was my understanding of the Xingyi, the internal harmonization or internal harmonies of that coupling. Xin is that exactly what you said. It's like Xin is the horse, and Yi is the rider.
Right.
And the heart can, if the rider falls off the horse will bolt and just be run, just untethered through the forest, out of control. So you need the Yi as the rider and the Xin as the horse, and part of Xingyi is to actually align those. That's the first point of call, to have the instinctual energy, the feeling, the chi of that emotion, but to guide that and direct that and harness that through the Yi, as you say, the cognitive function, the conditioned mind that can control that force. Otherwise, it's just like a wildfire.
Yeah, very, very true. That's it. Well, we kind of went off on a side path here. We were talking about your path. So you said you started learning Xingyi with your uncle. I take it.
Yeah, that's right. And for whatever reason, he went through Taiwan. I think it was the Tangshe Dao sort of organization down there at that time. Must have been in the late, I don't have the exact date, sorry, but it must have been around the late 70s, early 80s that he was over there, and he was influenced by Robert W. Smith's writings and the access to those early books on Xingyi and Bagua. And so, he just started, and this would have been in the early 90s. So I started training with him, pretty fundamental sort of, standing in Santi and doing 5 elements and very sort of rudimentary but fundamental training.
I had a very interesting conversation. It's still going on. I posted one of my Santi Shi timer videos that I made recently. I put it in a martial arts group, a Chinese martial arts group on Reddit. And, I got these guys trying to say that... Firstly, the one guy was saying that Santi Shi doesn't come from Xingyi Quan, it comes from Yi Quan, and I had to give him a history lesson.
Okay.
And then I've to this day, I've still got somebody commenting saying, oh, well, we don't see the founder of Xingyi Quan as Li Neng. According to something that I read, there's actually 3 streams, and the founder is Ji Ke, and I'm like, oh my God. Am I having to have a
Okay.
very basic conversation here? But the point
Yes.
that they were trying to make was that no, Xingyi practitioners don't really practice Santi Shi. Only some do, and I was like, no,
No way.
it's like it's signature practice. I mean,
Yeah. My first day in Beijing, when I was training in Beijing, I'll just jump ahead. My first day training in Beijing, I went down to the purple bamboo park
right?
where
I've trained there for years
used to
and
train.
years and years. Yeah.
You're right. Okay, great. First day down there, probably 6 o'clock in the morning, still dark, winter.
Yeah.
So we're December, freezing cold, as you know.
Yeah.
And I was much unprepared. I had to stand in Santi all day, pretty much, with breaks.
Yeah.
Just swapping leg to leg, and Wang Trevu would come and he would just sweep my front foot, so I had to lift it off and place it back down, so it would go 100% weight on the back foot and then place it back down.
Replace it, yeah.
Yep, and do that over and over, have breaks, have lunch, come back in the afternoon and did it all day. By the end of that day, those subway stairs, coming out of the subway, trying to go back to the hotel, I could not walk.
It was hell.
I was crippled. Yep. That was my first day of Xingyi training back then.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and that's what I was trying to get at here. It's like we're talking about the art that Li Neng created. When we say Xing,
right.
Xingyi Quan, with Xing as in shape, that's Li Neng's art. What he learned
100%.
before that, Xingyi Liu He from the Dai family, there's a whole lot of there's a whole lot of debate exactly what he learned. He learned from them. Where I'm under the belief that he cross-trained with some other stuff as well, and that he created this art based on that. But his core fundamental practice was standing in Santi Shi. And there are very versions of Jianzhuang standing already in Dai family practices. So to say that it didn't exist or it's not part of Xingyi Quan is very strange for me today, because that's the fundamental practice. And as you say, that's what you start with. I mean, you will do that for hours and hours and hours and hours. Like my teacher told me, his teacher stood for 3 years. He wasn't taught anything else. 3 years, Santi Shi. So
I've done hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of hours on that. Yeah,
exactly.
That's exactly right. Even when I started with my uncle, we did that. 5 or so years later, when I went to China, we repeated the same thing.
Yeah.
So 100%, I don't understand where people would not think that wasn't the absolutely... It's called the gateway to Xingyi boxing. So I don't understand.
Well, I suppose you could say that there might be a minority of people or certain people that don't stand in it, but let's not now try paint the brush that represents the majority of it. I would say that if you've got one or two in 1,000 practitioners that don't practice Santi Shi, okay, that's a possibility, but the majority of them definitely do. And even what you could say is that might be some debate on which discussion or which groups decide to stand how long. Some might focus on extremely long periods of standing and others not so long, but they all stand.
Some people say, everybody stands, but some people, exactly that's what I was going to say as well, so they say don't go past 10 minutes on each leg. Other people say work up to 20.
Right.
I did 35. I could do 35 on my right leg and 32 on my left or something. That's what I worked up to.
Yeah, you're right-legged, huh?
Right leg dominant. The genes don't fit over the right leg, but they always fit on the left one.
Right. All right. So you started training. You started doing Santi Shi with your uncle.
It was. I'd had a bad accident actually, and I had to get some acupuncture and various things and sort of rehab my body from an accident back then when I was younger as well. And so I started to get some acupuncture and Chinese medicine treatment, and I was getting right into training the Kung Fu Xingyi Quan. We primarily did Xingyi Quan. We did some sort of I Chuan type standing because the instructor was, had sort of gone into I Chuan and various things a little bit as well. So we did a lot of standing then. We did a lot of hours and hours of standing.
When you say other standing, were you doing things like Fuhu, taming the tiger, and Jianglong, descending dragon?
Not so much those, but we would do the 3 roundings or bracing the chest, and we might do a little bit of the kind of shield and sword sort of side-on ones, but mainly Santi and downward pressing palms from Bagua and various things. Not that I knew it at the time, it was just go through a different set. Some uphold heaven as well. So it was sort of a mixed bag of stuff.
Right, that's all good stuff, though. I mean, irrespective of you
Yeah.
doing Xingyi or Bagua, that's all really good stuff. I mean, we'll get into the Bagua stuff in a bit. You carry on with your history because it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I was training a lot and getting treatment and stuff as well, and so I sort of expressed some interest in learning about acupuncture and Chinese medicine as well. And my uncle said, well, if you really want to understand these arts on a deeper level, it's good to study the Chinese medicine as well. So then I applied for that, and that's how I moved over to Brisbane, because there was only really 2 courses in Australia back then at the time, and that was either down in Sydney, and I didn't really fancy living down there if I didn't have to at the time, and Brisbane. And it just turned out that he was going to Brisbane for a period of time as well, so I'd be able to continue some Xingyi Chuan over here. So I went and enrolled, I got my qualification in traditional Chinese medicine as well, and I was training Xingyi the whole time. So that was probably over a 4 or 5 year period.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, there's only 2 places in Australia. Is it still like that today, that certify people for Chinese acupuncture and medicine?
There's more courses around, but it was pretty. It was still pretty underground then. It was not a lot of practitioners around and not a lot of colleges, but there's more around now.
And was there a lot of demand back then for people looking for treatment? It was. Okay. It was pretty popular. I mean, it was still alternative. You couldn't get rebates on health funds or anything like that per se at the time. Right.
But it was getting more and more popular. I think that early 90s had a real kind of alternative medicine, and it was a real movement, sort of another wave coming off the kind of 70s and 80s. That early 90s had another alternative wave, not just in music, but just across the board, alternative living and I think the martial arts was a part of that as well.
That's interesting. I mean, what is the current mentality or thought towards Chinese acupuncture and medicine in Australia today? Are they more open to it?
Yeah, it's very well accepted.
Okay.
Yeah, there's there's almost an acupuncturist on every corner over here now. But it's people don't bat an eyelid about acupuncture anymore. It's definitely much more mainstream.
Oh, that's great. All right, yeah. So you got your qualifications. Did you open up a practice in Brisbane then, or were you still traveling?
Yeah, I opened up a practice. But I before I did that, I got my qualification here, and then I did my postgraduate work in China, and that was my way of getting to China to go and train.
Okay, nice.
Martial arts, actually, which was my main aim through the whole thing. So I got into the Guangxi province in Nanning in the Chinese medicine college down there. In the south of China, and that was my first trip to China. I think that was, when was it? Yes, must have been, I think it was 90, graduated in 97, then I went over there in 1998.
Okay.
So I started off in the south of China, but they had no Xingyi boxing there. They couldn't find any Xingyi instructors down there for me, or the doctors and the college, but they found I said, can you get Xingyi or Bagua? Because I wanted to train in the evenings, and they found me, but then she was the national champion at the time, Zhang Xiaomin.
Okay. She
was the wushu. It was a wushu style of Bagua. So I used to train with her at night. And then there was a Taijiquan instructor, Bo Le, I think his name was. Did a little bit with him. I wasn't interested in Taiji, but I just did it to train.
Right.
Some in China at the time, yeah.
Yeah, Guangxi.
So we used to go to hospitals and stuff, and then come home and train and do some Bagua and stuff at night.
Right. Guangxi is obviously more well known for the southern styles.
That's right. Yeah.
Did you have a bit of culture shock when you first got there?
100%. 100%. It was just because in that time in the 90s, Nanning was not there was a lot of beggars and poor people, and it was coming from Australia. It was an absolute culture shock, mate, to be there. Rats running around everywhere, out of the restaurants, literally people chasing them out of the kitchens, big black rats as big as a cat.
Yeah.
Like all the kind of cliched things. People were amazing, but yes, it was a very, it was an absolute culture shock for me, for sure.
I'm sure. And I'm sure Guangxi is also pretty well known for its wider variety of things they eat. So
definitely.
I'm sure that was a culture shock for you too.
Yeah, it was amazing, mate. It was an amazing time. And it was great working at the hospital and got to work in lots of different areas, and as I said, training at night. But I was always planning on getting doing my postgraduate work, getting my certificate there, and then going up to Beijing looking for the Xingyi Bagua masters up there.
So how long were you in Guangxi for?
It was about, I think I was there for just under 2 months. I think I was in China that trip for 2 months.
Okay.
Altogether. I can't remember, exactly how long the course was. It might have been like a 6 or 7 week course.
Right.
Most days. And because I ended up in Beijing at the end of my trip just over 2 weeks, I think, for that leg of it.
And what was that like for you to contrast from Guangxi?
Well, it's a bit of an interesting story because, as you know, like it's a big city. The people are completely different. They look different.
Yeah.
Northerners. It was great because I took that train up from the south up to the north.
Oh, that's
and so
awesome.
It's
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I get to see, you get to see it to change like wheat fields and various things from the south and the rice, and you see that change of scenery as you're taking that train trip. So that was great, having like 2 days and a night on the train sort of thing. So that was really good. And I met some people on the train that helped me as well. But when I left Australia, the only thing I actually had was given, it's a bit of an interesting story how I actually found Wang Shifu and started training with him. Is I was only given a photo of Sun Jianyun, Sun Lutong's daughter. Sun Fenglin, the Xingyi master.
Right.
And Wang Tong. There's a photo of 3 of them all together. Okay. So I didn't have a name. I didn't have any Chinese characters or a name or an address or any idea. And you know how big Beijing is. I think it was almost 15 million people at the time. Yeah. So when I was in the south of China, where I was staying there at the university or college grounds, I had made a friend there who was a Taiji practitioner and a Chinese herbalist and Chinese herbal scholar. He was an Israeli fellow, Yuron. And he just wrote in Chinese because he could read and write Chinese really well. And he just wrote in Chinese on a bit of paper. He said, look, there's all these stadiums that do wushu up there in Beijing.
Right.
So get to one of these. And he just wrote what the name for a sports stadium would be, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't even know what it said. I mean, I could speak. I did 2 years of Chinese to speak and stuff. I could get around and order food and stuff, but I wasn't very good with reading and writing and the deeper stuff. And so he said, look, just try it. And they'll probably know the old masters and things like this, and they might be able to give you a hand. So, I had this kind of printed out photo, and then I had this scrap of foolscap paper ripped off in the corner with these Chinese characters on it, and I jumped on the train and headed up to Beijing on the journey. So once I got up there, I actually had a contact. It was another TCM college in Beijing, in the old quarter near all the hutongs.
Okay, closer to the center.
I'm not sure if it's even there anymore. Yeah. So I had a hotel that wasn't attached to the kind of TCM, the traditional Chinese medicine building, and I stayed at the hotel there. And the next morning, I just woke up really early. It was one of those kind of winter, cold but clear days that you get.
Yeah.
And I just hit the streets. I kind of figured out where the city centre would be, and I walked around looking for buildings that looked like institutions or something, and tried to ask people with this bit of scrap of paper, do you know what this is, and do you know where something like this would be?
Right.
So you can imagine how that went. That went on for hours.
I'm sure.
But, about, say, lunchtime, so this is probably about 4 hours into the journey, or 5 hours already, and I saw these look like students coming out at lunchtime, and I thought, that must be a college or a uni or something.
Right.
And so I went up to people in their, early 20s and stuff, and I said, tried to say, do you know where something like this is? Sports, Kung Fu, Wushu. And, a whole bunch of people ignored me.
Yeah.
But then one young lady, she sort of gestured with me with her hand, and she locked up a bike, and she said, follow me. And she went to a payphone. She made a phone call, and then she gestured with me again. She was standing at a bus stop waiting. I'm trying to talk to her, but she's barely saying anything at all. Doesn't speak any English, and my Chinese wasn't that great. Gets to the bus, pays for 2 tickets, gets me on. We're on this bus, absolutely packed, going all, I don't know where we are, what we're doing. I've got no clue where we're going. But she's going out of her way, and in those days people had pages, of course, no mobile phones or anything, or internet. And so we were on these buses. We changed. She made another phone call. We got on another bus, probably on that for 20 minutes. Got off there and then followed her, and she ends up taking me to one of these big stadiums right in the middle of Beijing, and go out of the way. She must have been gone for an hour and a half easy, and she said, here's my pager number. If you get lost or anything, just get them to ring my pager and I'll come and save you again. I tried to give her some money, or thinking she just disappeared off into the day. And so I went up into there, and there was all the there was a couple of wushu. I think the Russian wushu team was there.
Okay.
Maybe something like a Polish one or something, but there was no sort of actual Chinese people hanging around in there. It was lunchtime, and as you know, like especially back then, everything shuts down for that 2-3 hours. Everybody disappears. So I couldn't actually get really any help from there. So I walked out of these offices kind of across the road from the big actual stadium that you could see, and there was an army guy riding a bike, and so I hailed him down and I said something to him. He showed him the same thing, and then he rode off, and I just thought, doesn't want to help. Doesn't know what I'm talking about. Foreigner. And then I'm walking down this road in the afternoon, no clue, sun's going down now, don't know where I'm going, and I hear this, hey, and it's this army guy riding the bike back. He's like, I've walked off, he's gone off and come back, and he's gone and found whatever I was looking for, and he took me to some offices underneath the actual stadium itself.
Okay.
And there's a rabbit warren of stuff in there, and I went through, and there's 3 guys with their heads down on different desks asleep, just absolutely asleep, and made the cough and knocked on the door, and eventually roused one of them up. Oh my God, the foreigners here staring at us. And I had the photo of Wang and Sun and Sun Fenglin, and said, I was looking for these people and these teachers and blah, blah, blah. And then he disappeared off and come back, and he said, I could understand, he said, my boss, my boss will know these people.
Okay.
And about half an hour later, came back, and I went and saw the boss and showed him the photos, and then he knew all of them, and he said, Sun Jianyun has passed away recently. Yep. And Sun Fenglin had already passed away, but he knows Wang Tong. He said, I'm friends with him, I'll give him a call. So he rang Master Wang, and by sort of nighttime, sort of sundown there, I was in a cab going over there and knocking on the door of Master Wang Tong.
Oh, mission accomplished. I mean, that's quite a lot of luck that you had. I mean, probably fate, but quite a lot of luck that you managed to find the specific person that you were looking for. I mean, pardon the other 2 that had passed away already, but did you ever find out which stadium you were at, where you were?
I didn't. No.
That's interesting.
No, I didn't. Yeah.
And why did you have this particular photo of these 3 individuals?
It's because when my uncle had gone from Taiwan, eventually in the 80s, he'd gone to mainland China, and he'd ended up in the parks in Beijing.
Okay.
And he was doing Chinese medicine there as well, similar thing to what I ended up following and doing as well.
Right.
And so he'd ended up seeing Wang and the group, must be in the Purple Bamboo Park at the time as well, I'm pretty sure. And, Wang and that said to him, well, if you find anyone else who's better at Xingyi and Bagua in here, go and train with them. If not, come back and train with me.
Okay.
But he was very secretive, so he didn't really say who his teachers were. And, is that time in in the early 80s and now the 70s and 80s where the Orient's still very mysterious and so he wasn't forthcoming exactly. We didn't really know, and he didn't really say that he was actually on paper the Dietzer of Wang Tong.
Okay.
Because they were probably only about 10 years apart, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe. So he never said, look, this is Wang Tong and this is the in that sense.
So you don't know if he did Baishe with Wang Tong even?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, he did.
He had.
He had. Okay.
I found, I did know that later on.
Okay.
Yeah. But because of the way that I found him, because after that, when I went down and started training the next day at the Purple Bamboo Park, then they got a translator and they said, first thing they said, how come your instructor didn't give Master Wang, the actual address? He knows the address exactly where he lives.
Oh.
And then they asked me how I found him, because what had happened is the guy on the phone had misunderstood, and he'd basically said to Wang Tong that I was my uncle.
Oh, I see.
That's why I said, send him around. I haven't seen him for decades. So, and when I knocked on Wang's door, he opened the door. He's just
You've changed.
staring at me. Yeah, and he did not flinch. Later, he said to me, he said, you looked enough like your uncle. He said you were too old to be his son, but you looked enough like him to actually have to be related. I guess you must have been his nephew or something. Okay. So, he just waved his hand, come in, be my guest. He didn't bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
But the next day when they had the translators actually ask me all the detail, and I probably left it, about how I found Wang exactly without the address, and I told them the whole story and how I ended up there, and they said, well, Master Wang feels that it's destiny, in the sense that you're destined to be his student because of the way you found him over that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier as well. It's probably destiny, because that's and to get what you did done in a day is not very easy or normal either.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, mate. Yeah. Spirit being.
So from then on, you started training with him?
Next morning, early and dark, straight away, mate. That was the first day, and he just said to me, we got down there really early. And it was just me and him as far as the Xingyi Bagua crew in that part at that time, because it's winter and stuff and there wasn't a lot of students around. And he said, what do you want me to show you? And I said, well, you're the master. And he goes, do you want to learn correctly, or you want me to show you a bunch of forms and techniques? I said, I want to learn correctly. He says, right, this is Santi. And he just corrected my Santi and made major changes to it. And we spent that horrific day in the freezing cold with the worst shaking legs I've ever had.
Well, did you have the correct clothing for Beijing's winter?
Because number one, I've been the south of China, because it's a lot warmer and more humid, and I come from Australia. I had every article of clothing out of my suitcase on at the same time.
Yeah, I can believe that. It's always. I remember my first trip to China. I came to Beijing, and that was early, probably 2000.
Yeah.
And from Beijing, it was winter. I then went into Inner Mongolia for 3 months.
Oh, wow.
And that's even colder.
Yeah,
and I just remember getting out of the airport in Inner Mongolia and taking my first breath and feeling like my lungs had frozen. I remember seeing that somebody had hung up like a jersey, a sweater that they had washed as I got to the community area that I was going to stay in. And they had hung this thing up to dry, and the thing was frozen solid with icicles hanging off of it.
That just reminds me. I had a beanie on, which I'd bought. Was my beanie for winter in Australia, which is like not cold at all, really, especially where I was living. And I was sweating in my beanie, and it was freezing in the beanie. Yeah. The sweat was freezing in the beanie, and I had no gloves. And Master Wang was saying, you got to get yourself a pair of gloves at least. What are you doing?
Yeah. You need gloves. Crazy. Particularly, what I found, like training through winters here outdoors, when you start, because every session begins with Santi Shi. It doesn't matter how long you've been practicing. Yeah. So we used to start with Jianzhuang every single session. And for the first 5 minutes or so, you definitely need the gloves or so. But then after that 5 minutes or so, things start to move.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're okay. Actually, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, you can take the gloves off.
Yeah.
But for that static portion in the beginning, you definitely should have gloves on.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, I know of people that have been standing out in the parks here in winter and they got frostbite on like fingers. And
I believe it.
So
There was an Yichuan guy there. He would stand off. You know how they've got those little, I don't know if they still got them. You know, little cross bits of bamboo. Do they still have that to designate?
They do.
Into the card beds? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And he would stand behind those in the actual bushes, if you like. He would be there in the dark before I get there, and I'd be thinking I'm the first one there. And he would just be standing in that Zhuang with no gloves most of the time, and he'd just give you a nod. And he'd be facing exactly where we train. Wang would come and talk to him, you know, have a few durries in the morning and to him, and he'd just be standing there, mate, for hours in the cold, in the dark, not moving. He was incredible.
There's actually quite a few prominent practitioners that practiced in Zhejiang, even from Yichuan, and their descendants still carry on training there in the same spot today. So I know exactly where they are. In fact, a friend of mine who studied with them used to train there every single morning, and they just literally don't move for like 3 hours. So
Serious.
That's
serious standing.
That's there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was my first place training with my teacher as well, was Purple Bamboo Park. I made a little video. It was either earlier this year or whatever. I went and filmed there a little bit.
Great.
So you should take a look. It'll bring back some memories.
I will. Is that on your Instagram or is it on YouTube or?
On my YouTube channel. Excellent. I've got a few videos called under a series called The Martial Parks of Beijing. So I filmed a little bit in Purple Bamboo. I went to the Temple of Heaven. I went to the Temple of the Sun as well. I've got a couple of others that I want to go to. But you can go check it out.
I will. It's fantastic.
It'll bring back memories for you.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so. I think on both my Instagrams, on my freestyle and turner martial art and Silentium Wrestling, I've got. I don't know if I've got photos because my freestyle and turner martial arts one's a new one. I'm just still getting content up there. But you can see the Purple Bamboo Park. Wang's got his shirt off, but that's years later in summer. But you can see the Silentium guys that used to train next to us, and there's I think it was a Chen Taijiquan. That Master Wang used to bully all the time over there, and there's a lot of those crew that were there from back when I was first there. It was a similar setup. Everybody had their spot, and it's great.
Right.
Have a look. That sounds excellent.
Did you guys used to train? If you just come in from that one door, I think it's the west gate. I can't remember if it's west or north.
Yeah.
And you just turn off to the left, and it's behind a small grove there.
Yeah, you used to come in and had that red. It was just like there was a bunch of bamboo. And then they had that red gate that you would come in. Yeah, and essentially I think you go left, and it's not far down in the grotto, sort of there. That's
where I used to train as well.
Yeah, wow.
I used to train. And one of Wang Tong's students teaches there still today. When he's there.
Do you know his name or?
I don't remember his name. But I haven't seen him for a couple of years anyway. The pandemic is kind of...
or later?
I think it's one of his original.
Yeah, okay.
One of his original.
Yeah.
But the pandemic has screwed everything up.
That's true.
Even you'll see it even when I filmed there. The people that I expected to see just over 2 years, they're not there anymore, and hopefully it recovers. But I also used to train there with my teacher, but then we used to stop training in the park and used to train in the parking lot of a restaurant right next to it because there'd be less people.
Yeah,
that became our spot. And that restaurant's gone.
It's crazy busy in the summer, isn't it, down there?
It's crazy. Everyone's dancing or doing...
Yeah, I don't think it's not good to train there in the summer like that. It's too busy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we used to train right next to it. It wasn't too far. Yep. You'd instead of going into that gate, you'd walk across that bridge. If you remember, there was that little... there's a bridge that goes over the canal. There was a canal on the one side. So it was between the park and the National Library, because the National Library is right next to it.
No.
Maybe
I did, but I forgot because a long time ago. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it was right close to the library. We'd train in the restaurant. It was an open parking of a restaurant, so they wouldn't open until closer to lunch. So there's completely open.
So you had
and we used to train there.
Space, that's good.
Yeah, perfect. So what was your training like with Wang Tong?
Yeah, so we trained every day for just over 2 weeks, and we trained all day. So in those early trips that I did there at that time, we would train really early in the morning. We'd get something to eat. Then we'd come back and train again. and then we'd get to lunch and we'd have that 2-hour period. Obviously in summer we'd come back way later because it was too balmy and too hot. You didn't like
too hot.
It was too hot. Being from Australia, we didn't really care, but and then we would train all night. So often, not at the Purple Bamboo Park. That was was later because Master Wang moved away from there, and they built all those new kind of fancy high rises and Haidian, and they had the big courtyards. So we started training there. So we would train, train at night there because it was cooler. Sometimes till 11 o'clock at night.
Okay. Yeah, I've done that many times with my teacher as well. It's actually really nice in summer.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just eating a lot of food and resting in between. Yeah, so I trained every day with him for 2 weeks, and we really hit it off. We had a good rapport, and he liked the effort that I put in and agreed to keep training me.
Oh, that's great. And initially you were focusing on Xingyi.
I was, and all he used to say to me, well, what happened is once I was allowed to actually do something, he would say, attack me with your Xingyi. So he would just take me out with Bagua every time. He would never use any Xingyi, and he would just like trip and throws and point to heaven, pierce the earth, and do like sort of knee taps and stuff from point to heaven, stab the earth, and just stand up, grapple and wrestle against me, and dodging from one flank to the other and turning. And I really, I was really impressed with what he could do with that. And all he used to say is, look, that first couple of weeks that we did training, he just said, at the end of your training, just do 10 minutes circle walking.
Okay.
And that's our plan.
So it was basically getting you into it slowly.
Yeah. But he showed me some sort of linear flow forms that he used to practice in a kind of freestyle way, where you'd be swimming and like the end, like if you're coming around back to guard in your 64 palm, any of those snaking and dragon moves. And he just showed me a bunch, and he showed me the application straight away. And so we used to just drill these and turn up and down, up and down, up and down. So he had me doing that, and then he had me doing some circling. I'd done a little bit of Bagua back in Australia, but the teachers that I'd trained with didn't really rate Bagua, mainly because they didn't know, they hadn't really learned it properly, and they couldn't apply it correctly. And so they didn't really know what the moves were for. So we did a bit of Ding Shi. So I already had the basic circle walking, 4 palm shapes, down a couple of...
So just for the listener, Ding Shi is fixed body palm. So we do circle palms, walking, holding a fixed body posture. Yeah. So you started learning those.
Yeah, so I already started learning those in Australia, especially when I was in Brisbane doing a training, and then I would fly back to Perth, and teacher would be back here as well, and back and forth. And he started some classes, and after I'd been doing it a few years, he got me to start taking the classes here. I didn't want to teach, but he wanted me to teach because I'd picked it up. I'd dedicated my life to it. I'd do 3 hours a day easy. Sometimes 4 hours, 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening, even when I was, working or at college. I didn't really want to teach, but just sort of fumbled into that and fell into that. And so that would help. I had people to train with and do the basics. So there's a little bit of those fixed date palms with an emphasis on probably the Qigong and stillness and movement type of meditative aspect for that. And then Xingyi more for some actual technical stuff and self-defense. So Wang just improved my circle walking as well, even all on that first trip. And showed me some of these linear drills and just little movements and techniques and how to apply them. And I went away and I did a lot over that next year before I came. And he ended up coming up to Australia actually. And his first trip, we brought him out to, I got a group together and we brought him out to Brisbane. That was his first trip out of China ever. And so he lived with me, and so we lived together for, a month at a time and do intensive training, and then he'd go back, and then a year I'd work and save up my money. Then I'd go to China for 3 weeks and train every day, intensive, all day, every day and night, and then come back, and then he'd come the next year. We just sort of did that over that, couple of decades. can't remember how many trips. I probably did 5 trips to China or something. He might have done 4 or 5 trips over here as well.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So you started doing more and more of the Bagua Zhang curriculum through that process as well.
Yeah, and then when we started getting into that deeper, I mean, it didn't take me long to be hooked. There was something great, you know what the circle walking like. It's addictive.
Yeah.
The circle walk, anyone who's ever done it, it's an addictive practice to do. Just a great daily practice at any level. And I got right into it. But I found the trips and the throws and the stand-up grappling, the shuai jiao, not just the shuai jiao, but just the adapted self-defense trips and throws in Bagua. I just took to them like a duck to water.
Right.
I just found I could do them on lots of different body types and people very quickly, almost immediately, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was a real... And I was a staunch Xingyi man before that. My teacher was a staunch Xingyi man who thought Bagua was rubbish, really, and flowery. But it's because he didn't really know all the trips and throws and takedown.
I find that's quite common though with a lot of the Western Bagua practitioners. They know a Bagua form or they know some movements. They don't actually know it as a system. And then they make a conclusion based on that little bit that they've seen. And of course, if all you're looking at is forms, like for example, Lianhuan Zhang or Lao Ba Zhang, it's not going to make any sense to you on its own.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. It reminds me. I think it might have been after my second training trip with Wang. It was very early, and we were already right into the Bagua. Still doing Xingyi Quan as well, but he favors Bagua as well. So
he's very much a Bagua person, and very much.
But he mixes the Xingyi and Bagua up pretty flawlessly. He doesn't really, he does his own, as you know, we've got to develop our own expression and version of things. But I remember I flew back to Perth from over here, and I was deep into the Bagua, and I went to a class, and there was another staunch Xingyi guy, and he's late 20s, and that Bagua's all flowery garbage, And I said, what particularly is flowery about it? Oh, it's all just useless, flourishes move. I said, well, what's a flourisher one? Can you give an
example? Which part are you an example?
Yeah. What specifically are you talking about? And my memory is that he did like a following body palm, like we call a lower piercing palm,
Right.
And doing off of the arms bowl, the Buddhist monk offers the arms bowl at the end. It's like all this sort of stuff coming down here and doing all this. And I said, oh, yeah. I said, actually, that's a really good move. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I said, oh, yeah. Put your hands up. And, he puts up, takes his kind of Santi, modified Santi, and comes into something, just dip down, fireman's carry, boom.
Wheel throw.
Straight over.
Wheel throw.
Yeah.
It's a wheel throw.
Bang. See you later.
Yeah.
I just did that fireman's carry and just seeing flames. Oh, damn, I didn't know it was for that, and just, it was just a good eye-opener for him. But it's just a typical attitude, and that's most of the time not even their own. As you say, they've just seen some forms or patterns and...
Exactly.
Or maybe some, some other people's attitudes that they borrowed. But, I just took to it like a duck to water, and it was complex and reversals, and particularly the wrestling and stand-up grappling and
the china, the locking, the controlling.
And just escapes and the whole sort of strategy, the combat strategy of it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to it, and that's why it takes time to actually go into it and understand it and develop it. I mean, you were mentioning for the listeners the Ding Shi, and that's basically the foundational practice for our line of Liang Bagua is the Ding Shi Ba Zhang, the 8 fixed posture.
That's how we all start. That's how we should all start. Yeah.
And there you go. You see another example of this idea of Zhanzhuang or post standing, because even though you're walking the circle, it's a mobile route but a fixed posture. So it's got a very similar. If you take Santi Shi as a fixed route and a fixed posture, then you've got Ding Shi Ba Zhang as a mobile route with a fixed posture, and then you move on from there. It's a very similar concept. Just with a step. So and you have to develop that. I remember my teacher even saying things like, if you're too busy sometimes at work, you got too many things to do, work or whatever, you don't have time with Bagua, at least do the Ding Shi Ba Zhang. At least do that,
Yeah.
you know, and
sure.
and you can get away with it for the day. But don't ignore that, at least, you know.
Yeah,
so.
I would add, Ding Shi and the single and double palm change.
Exactly.
Get
So
those,
the first couple of mother palms.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always say to students as well, it's like, those fixed palms take almost like it's the snapshot, it's the end of a movement. And so when we're holding them, walking around, that's what looks funny to people. They're thinking, oh, what are you going to do? Walk at someone with your hands, held out in these funny shapes. They don't understand that that's the end of a movement that you go through. You're training the strength of that, the frame of that. You're training
the frame,
and
the energies that are manifested and held.
And this is where people sort of might get it wrong. They're holding these stiff frames out, and all you have is this extension of framing energy, and they're trying to push people out of it, not understanding that Ding Shi is the end point. If we were running through film of a dynamic movement in Bagua, then you might have a covering palm, or you might have your embrace the moon or something, your hands out in front of your chest. That's what's happening at the end of that thrust or the end of that grab, that movement, and we're holding that end moment. And that,
I've got
energy and blood.
A friend who studied them, and when he first learned them, and then he started trying to put them together into one session, right, to do them back to back, all 8, and he told me the next day he felt like he wanted to call an ambulance. So people don't realize when you do it right how difficult it is.
How much work it is. Yeah, it's real work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
it's real work. That's why I remember when I first started teaching, my teacher telling me, when we start walking the circle in winter, after a couple of circles you can take your shirt off.
That's it.
And I was like, it's too cold. But when you start doing it, you realize you really can. You generate so much heat.
Yeah.
So,
100%. And did you do the really low postures? And we used to call it a stick grinding step, because Wang Shifu used to get I guess kind of like twigs, but thick ones, put them all around the circle. And we used to have to with the ball.
Push them.
Yeah, but also break them. So we used to have to break the sticks, push on it, snap it, try and snap that stick. We used to dig that in.
We have this, the words for each step in Tang Ni Bu is Deng Mo Ti Tang Cai. So Deng is to pedal, Mo is to rub, Deng Mo Ti is to kick, Tang is the weighting, and Cai is to stamp, and it works in that sequence, right?
Yeah.
So it's exactly that. And the Tang part, my teacher would always say, like there's a stick on the floor or a rope on the floor, and you're rubbing it, you're rolling it, and then Cai is to snap it at the end.
That's it.
So we practice like that. I mean, that's at least in Liang, that's the way to do it, particularly our Liang. So I know that other lineages kind of have different focuses on their Tang Ni Bu, but ours is exactly like that, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it's great stuff. It's a real conditioning exercise as well. That's how I tell my guys too, is this is a conditioning exercise as well.
For sure. So when was the last time you came back into China, and you've brought students here before as well?
Yeah, I haven't actually been there for about 10 years now. It was Master Wang's 70th birthday. And I had a Baishura ceremony to take Dita on there. He wanted me to take Dita, disciple students on, for anyone who's listening. He wanted me to have a Baishura ceremony in China for everybody to see us there, kind of validate me and us there. So it was a massive gathering. It was martial artist masters from it was hundreds of people there. Shaolin guys and Yichuan, Xingyi, Bagua Zhang. There's people everywhere. And we brought a small group of students over, and some of those became my Dita as well at that time. So I actually had the ceremony up there on the.
Oh, that's nice.
It was a real privilege and honor to do that.
And that was about 10 years ago. You said, huh?
Maybe 11 years ago or so. Haven't been back since. I mean, China's as you know, changed so much. I mean, I'm sure you've been there for a while now, haven't you?
Yeah, 13 years constantly. But I've been training here for 20 years.
Right. So you know exactly how different it was 20 years ago?
Oh, yeah. It's completely different.
Yeah, so that that sort of late 90s, early 2000s was a different place. And then by the mid-2000s is just, wasn't the same Dita, wasn't the same people, wasn't the same sort of
feeling
stuff in that. It's just changed so much, and yeah, that was the last time I went over there. So for his that shindig for the 70th, and had the Baishu there.
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing, and I'm sure your students really enjoyed it. I mean, if that was their first time as well, it must have been a total experience for them.
Yeah, it was a bit of a whirlwind trip. Unfortunately, didn't have much time due to a lot of different things. So we basically focused. We didn't get to do a lot of training. Did a little bit, and there wasn't many people around to train with. So it was just a bit of a whirlwind trip for the Baishu. It was different from the other time. I had a couple of guys, Ben Chapman and John Paul Statz, and they would come to China with me, and Byron Hillier as well. And they did a lot of training over the years before that and decades before that. They've been on numerous trips with me and on their own as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome though.
Yeah.
That they got the experience anyway. So I'm just trying to remember if it was 10 years ago where I was, because, it could have been at that time. Sometimes my teacher would be called to one of his groups that he'd be teaching in he had quite a few different groups in Russia. So like some in different parts. Yeah. So it might have been during a period he wasn't there.
I can't remember if he was there. Jiao Dayuan, I think, was there. I remember seeing him. It was a bit of a blur. Most of us drank too much at the same time on that day. Just a few bad heads going around there. But maybe. It would be interesting, because I guess it was 11 to 12 years ago even now. God, because of COVID, it's just thrown everything out, whole timeline.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
But yeah, you may well have been somewhere, but I'd be surprised if...
I would have rememred though, but it might have been a period, if my teacher wasn't in China, then I wouldn't have gone. So, yeah. So...
Yeah,
he might have been on one of his little teaching trips to Russia for a week or two. So
great.
At that time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So,
but they're the last three that are alive of Li Ziming's original disciples.
Yes,
that's
right.
Pretty sad.
They learn in the old ways very much.
Yeah, I remember the last time I saw Ma Chuanshu, he died just in the beginning of COVID, just in the beginning of the pandemic. But I remember the last time I saw him, and others, and now they're all gone. So
it's true.
Time is just going, really. I saw your teacher maybe 4 months ago at a Baishu ceremony of Zhao Dayuan's student. So one of his students. So one of my brothers, he's a shige, an older brother. He was doing a Baishu for his students, and Yang Shimin, he's one of Zhao Dayuan's older students. So I went there, and Wang Tong was there as well. So,
great.
And I hadn't seen him for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half with COVID going on.
Yeah.
So everyone's getting old.
Exactly. So. I speak to him every year for his birthday. I give him a call. We talk on the phone, and between his non-existent English and my very limited bad Chinese as well, we get through, and maybe he puts a family member on speak a bit more English, and we always get to communicate every year and send him a card and do all the things that I would normally do.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's great. We concentrated. I think thinking back, even think about talking to you and having a bit of trip down the memory lane. Like Wang Shifu used to say all the time, Ding Shi, Bada Zhang, Long Xing Zhang, no. And he just used to make the tight millstone guard and walking and do the piercing palm and single palm chain. He said, this is Bagua, this is Bagua. I think there was almost a bit of a freedom. I remember thinking this, like me not being Chinese or living in China, I don't have to represent everything identically, form on point, these things. There was a free expression for him. I mean, we certainly did do all the forms and all that sort of thing as well. But we're able to I think it freed him up a little bit and to concentrate, and we would spend a lot of time on the fundamentals and a lot of applications. And he was just absolute wealth of knowledge of all martial arts and chin na and locks and throws and holds, not just his lineage of Xingyi and Bagua Zhang either. So
Yeah.
So because he lived with me in Australia all those times, then, it was all day in the night on the couch, even if he had the telly going here, just
Exactly.
and finger holds and breaks and just constantly.
I mean, that's one of my joys with my teacher as well. I'll be
Yeah,
sitting in his apartment. We'll have eaten something and we're just sitting talking. Maybe he's got some CCTV sport channel on because he always likes to watch. It doesn't matter what sport is on. He'll turn that on and watch it. So it could be curling and he'll watch it. I don't know how he gets through that. But then in the middle of that, he'll be like, now let me show you something with this lock on this finger and, with this wrist and this little action here. And then it'll always tie back to whatever he was just watching that reminded him to show you. Yeah, those are great. Those are great moments.
That's the transmission. That's what the YouTube and Instagram and our videos and stuff just can't portray, is that energy exchange, that person-to-person transmission that these arts have held dear for generations and generations. That's how it's really passed on to you, that depth. That's fantastic.
Yeah, agree fully. And now you've got you're teaching in Australia. I've seen your one endeavor. It's called Silentium Wrestling, if I'm correct as well. So what is all that and what are you busy with?
Yeah, so teaching Xingyi and Bagua Zhang as well, separate classes for that. And then about 5 years ago, I had a bit of a vision. There was just enough stuff sort of coming outside Xingyi and Bagua. I couldn't really, in all good faith, it's material and training, because I also trained in wrestling like the last 5 years. I've trained in wrestling, judo, BJJ a little bit as well. I normally train with Jason Miller, who's a Gaha black belt, very high level, a great grappler and a great wrestler, and an American wrestling coach as well, Gary Clovius.
Okay.
Started off with Jason and Gary about 5 years ago, and just because I love wrestling. I spent about 10 years in my Bagua too, when I realized that Bagua was full of Kwai Shuai Jiao and Shuai Jiao type and wrestling type moves. I spent about 10 years sort of extracting the trips and throws and finding all of that in all the shapes, in all the Dingshi shapes, in all the changes. It's one of the things that I sort of do, is pretty much all our techniques have a striking and a grappling or chin na application, on any palm. And any movement can be one or the other, generally speaking. Obviously, some are more escapes and some are more strikes. But
Right.
But I really concentrated on the trips and throws and takedowns. And so, and look for similar things. I remember remember there was VCDs. Are there still VCDs in China?
I think you can still buy them, but I haven't seen a VCD player for a while, so I don't know what good it'll do for you. So.
One of my, because this is, as soon as the internet came out and stuff, and one of my fellow Dieter, I sort of next generation one of Wang's Dieter, asked him about if he could keep an eye out for any Shuai Jiao training materials for, and he found me this 7 VCD set that he got from me, which was great. And so I studied that over and over again.
Who was the teacher on the set? Do you remember?
You were going to ask me that. He's that most famous one with the cropped
Li
grey hair, small guy, old school.
Li Baoru. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
I know the set. I've got that set as well.
You got that set?
I've got
the supplementary training and stuff in it as well.
Yeah, I've also got the. There was like a 15 DVD set that him and a student of his put together, which was seriously in depth, and I got that like 10 years ago.
Right.
Full disclosure, I still have all my VCDs and all my DVDs, but I do not have a single CD drive in the house, so we have a small problem there.
Makes it hard, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, so, I spent a lot of, probably from, once I guess kind of 2005 onwards, it's been a good sort of 8 to 10 years really concentrating on all sorts of throws out of the Dingshi, Bagua Zhang, Longshang Zhang. They were my main 3. We do the 64 fighting palm as well, but do the fixed 8 palms and the 8 mother palms or big palms and the dragon form. To me, they're the core of our art and style. So yeah, I really concentrated on that, and then I started just to look at other forms of wrestling, Georgian wrestling. Once the internet really, Chibayodo, I think it is. It's a great art, very simple.
Yeah, they're very good.
Yeah, and that was a big influence on me. And then I did a little bit of judo over here, and as I said, then I got into some collegiate style wrestling and judo, and I still do stuff with Jason Miller over there at Real Fitness.
Nice.
Gaha, BJJ. Yeah, every week, every Thursday we train together. He trains me, yeah.
I started about 8 years ago going into BJJ gyms, and I started it here because I wanted other bodies to throw.
Yeah, that's it.
And then from then I've been studying that as well. Yeah, I mean, it's different. Sorry, say again?
Do you find that a lot of people don't like the stand-up throwing?
In China?
In the BJJ, they want to start on the ground?
Oh, yeah, but look, I was lucky in the first teacher that I found here. He was a black belt he got his black belt given to him by Hicks and Gracie, but he was a Pedro Sauer black belt. Right. So he was from America. He was an American guy, and he had black belts in other arts as well, including judo. So he would he would emphasize you've got to know how to throw people and stop them from throwing you.
That's so true.
So
yeah.
So I always I'm always on my feet. If you want to sit down in front of me, that's your choice.
Yeah. So, that's what's good about training with Professor Jason Miller. Like, he starts on the feet. He's a really good wrestler, good at judo. He's great at trips and throws and takedowns as well. So yeah, it's a good fit.
Yeah,
so,
that's great.
Yeah, that's my style sort of emphasizes that, and that's a bit of a long way of saying how I sort of got into Silentium Wrestling. And I was also interested in the internal side of things. I'm very practically minded in all applications, and it's got to work for me. There's none of that kind of magical bullet stuff as far as what we do. So I wanted to have an internal, a separate, and that's where the Silentium comes from. I wanted to have a sitting in the silence, more of an actual contemplative practice, and combining a jacketed wrestling form, which is a mix of Bagua and Xingyi techniques of the wrestling parts of those arts as well, plus a bit of catch wrestling and the other wrestling I've been learning over the last kind of 5-6 years as well. And so I wanted a separate format, or needed a separate format for that. And that was kind of the genesis of Silentium Wrestling.
That's awesome. And the name, does it hark back to anything specific?
Yeah, Silentium is a Latin word for, it originally means both stillness and silence. And so we bookend our wrestling practice with sitting in the silence, a contemplative prayer. And it comes from a Western spiritual Christian tradition as well. And so it's a contemplative prayer practice in the silence. You don't have to be a Christian or anything to do it, but it comes from that contemplative practice. And I wanted to not have to go to two different practices, but I wanted to have that kind of boundary. And so we start and finish sitting in the silence together on the mats.
Okay.
And, there's wrestling, and getting into traditional wrestling around the world, as you would well know, is that wrestling and spirituality, to wrestle, Jacob wrestling with the angel, it's biblical, it's ancient. Everywhere around the world, that wrestling has a spiritual component, the internal wrestle as much as the external wrestle. And to combine those things, felt very passionate about that as well.
So is that a separate teaching to your Xingyi and Bagua specific?
Yeah. Okay. I've got people that would come and do that don't do Xingyi and Bagua, even though it's a circular Bagua-esque style of wrestling.
I see.
Yep.
And how are people, which would you say people are more willing to, or interested in, between those few different methods?
Silentium Wrestling is a virtual, I don't want to say it's a new art in that sense, but it is a new practice format. It's a new practice in that sense. So people don't really know what it is. Whereas Xingyi and Bagua people have a reference point for that. So probably overall, it goes through different stages. You get a bit more interest in Silentium, you get a bit more interest in the Xingyi trend and Bagua. But the COVID, I launched this wrestling. I launched a new wrestling system and style just before COVID hit.
Oh, great!
So it was the worst kind of business venture that I could ever have done. So it was pretty bad timing because we weren't allowed to do any contact. We weren't, and people were also just kind of, a lot of people just fell off and just didn't want to do any contact stuff, and the government forbid it over here. So there was a long period, and that was not long. I'd kind of labbed it for, like put it in the laboratory. I'd put on a few workshops and, got a bunch of people come in and I'd been working on it for a few years prior. And but I got to that point where I launched some regular classes, and it was just before COVID hit. So it was still recovering from that, to be honest.
And how's it? Are restrictions all lifted now? You're able to do whatever you want?
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's all lifted.
That's good.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, I'm sure it's just a matter of getting back into things. I don't know how long it's going to take for people to get back to fully normal, but I think most people that were involved in martial arts, and particularly grappling arts like I was before, I've been doing that for 8 years on top of my other practices. It's like when COVID came, it wasn't as if I don't want to do it. It was as if like, right, who's got a bicycle lock and who's got a place to train? All right, cool. We'll just lock the door, put a curtain over the door so in case the cops come, they don't see us, but we carried on training. We tried even if it was just a few of us, we carried on.
Yeah, so did we. Yeah, that's exactly what we did as well. We did very similar things. And I guess it's also, it's sort of a couple of us said, it's proof that like the Xingyi and Bagua are having forms to do because we're allowed to, they suddenly realised, hey, you got to let people exercise. And so actually having forms to do, even though I'm not that forms heavy per se, but we still do them because they're the foundation.
Well, let's say individual practice. It doesn't have to necessarily be forms. It
That's
can
right.
just be individual practice.
Yeah, because I definitely emphasise the shadow boxing element of the form, seeing the form as a living library of technique, plus all the requirements and mechanisms of force and various things as well. But it gave us that ability to have the distance, the social distancing they want us to have, or to go out in the park and train in the morning and keep the distance and still run classes.
Yeah.
Whereas
even without classes, if you're locked down, if you're locked down, that's the problem. Okay, hindsight is 2020, so we kind of know now that all of the requirements were a bit stupid. But I kept on. Even at times when I had been locked down in my apartment as well. Exactly a year ago, I was locked. They put a thing on my door, everything. But for me, it's like, okay, so I'm just gonna push the couches aside, walk the circle in the living room every day, carry on. At least I'm getting my stuff done, and I'm pretty happy. I'm not like other people going absolutely bananas when they're not locked inside. If you've got these practices, you can still do things, right? You still got an anchor and an ability and an outlet to do things. And I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, those solo practices just became so important, so valuable. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so that's kind of how I go with Silentium. There are two main martial arts practices, doing the Xingyi and Bagua classes, and then running the Silentium as well as a separate. There's some people that do both, but yeah, there's kind of separate things. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I hope it grows. I hope your newly launched just before COVID Silentium Wrestling grows and you guys wear jackets, right?
Yeah. It was just a bit of a refinement process. I sort of tried it without it, but I like the idea of having traditional all those forms of jacketed traditional wrestling were a big influence on me, the European ones as well. And I really, really respected those old school traditional kind of village styles. And the Shuaijiao jacket was something that I was familiar with. And so I started incorporating that into the style.
Okay, well, yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, I hope it picks up and people get into it. And I hope more people get interested in Xingyi Quan and Bagua Zhang, particularly our family's Bagua Zhang specifically. But yeah, it's great that's happening down there, and I wasn't aware of it, so I'm really happy that we managed to meet, and hopefully I can be down there at some point soon, and we'll definitely get together.
Oh, definitely. That sounds fantastic, mate. I look forward to that. Are you able to train and stuff over there normally now, or?
Yeah, well, Beijing is basically the Forbidden City once again. So,
Wow.
but you can't come in from other provinces without, and definitely for the last, that the government meeting just happened here. So Beijing was closed off even to deliveries. We weren't able
Right.
to order, like, if you had online, you bought something and it was coming in from another province, you weren't getting it now. You're going to wait until the meeting is done. So for the moment, apart from the inconvenience of having to test every 3 days maximum and the random locking down of through contact tracing, we've been training. So that's okay for now. I
Wow.
have heard in the last few weeks there's an uptick in cases, so who knows what the hell they decide to do. But for now, it's okay. It's okay for now.
Geez.
Yeah.
Okay, it's very severe. I mean, we were pretty severe here at one point, but now seem just to be dealing with it and moving forward. Yeah.
Isn't
Well.
that odd though? Isn't it
Yeah.
odd? Like we
Yeah.
weren't so severe in the beginning of COVID, and then now when the Omicron's come out, and basically all the young people have been vaccinated here, so I don't see what the issue is. But now that it's even less of a major issue for most of the people, now they've implemented like serious restrictions and controls. It's very strange.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm hoping it ends because China's been closed off. It's been very difficult. Nobody can come in. So if you're coming in on a tourist, there's no such thing as a tourist visa at the moment. And for us that are in here to go out and in is difficult and or very expensive. So it's just been a major burden on us.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I
So,
hope it lifts for you very
yeah,
soon,
I'm hoping.
and you can get back to some normalcy and get back. Where do you normally train when you are normal? Would you go back to the bamboo park or purple bamboo?
No, I mean, for the last few years, my teacher lived in Weigongcun, which is Haidian district. That's where he's lived his whole life, right?
Right.
So we stopped training even when they demolished that restaurant. We weren't able to use that. That was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. We just started training. He's got a really nice area within his apartment complex, an open courtyard, and it's got shading from trees. It's a really nice spot, and we never used to use it in the past because he had just always been teaching and training close to the bamboo park. But for the last 6 or so years, we just trained there. So if we did train at my teacher, even before COVID, that's where we were training, which was close to his home.
Yeah, that's
So,
great.
and it's easier for him. He just comes down, and it's close to him.
And when did you have your biosure with him?
When
Yeah.
the first time I did it was actually in his apartment after a training session.
Yeah.
He told me, "You're gonna come and eat after training," and because we were training that afternoon, and this wasn't odd for him. It was quite normal that Shirmu would make. She makes the best dumplings. If anybody's who's listening who knows, she makes the best dumplings. But they would call me quite.
Maya Shurmu's dumpling recipe as well. The
There you go.
Yeah, fantastic.
So, and then I was sitting in with him, and he just said, "Okay, Wei Long, 你是我的弟子." He basically just said, "You're my disciple."
Okay.
And he said we will plan a public ceremony at some point when there's more people. And that was some years later that there were more people. When he first told me that I was his Diza, that was basically, my acceptance or rumen when I became his disciple. So yeah,
That's great.
and that was probably 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
So-
I have mine with Wang and a few other guys. We actually had it in Australia. When
Okay.
he was out, I think might have been his first trip in 2000. Was it 2000 or 2001?
Okay.
Yeah, and had a lot of people around. Did you have the incense idea if the incense ash falls down?
Yeah. The
No,
incense
sorry?
cannot fall down.
Yeah, when you have to put the brochure, the certificate on your head and balance it, and when they take it off your head, if the incense falls down, the ancestors don't permit you to become the Dita. Did you?
No, we
Story?
didn't do that. But I've been like the last time which was the last time he accepted any deeds. I was there. This was way after mine, my ceremony, and usually somebody of the same generation of the person who's accepting students has to Firstly, my teacher will light the incense, right? But then there's got to be somebody from the same generation to stand next to it and make sure that the incense doesn't fall down for the entire ceremony.
Yeah, right.
And because it was a period of time that, okay, as you know, many of them have passed away, and some were away, and one was ill.
Yep.
They couldn't come, so I had to take care of the incense during that ceremony. But it's a similar concept. It shouldn't fall down. Yeah.
I remember just going out and finding the thickest, ash that will fall on there, and when you'd wait until it fell down, and then it was all clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's classic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was. I would say 10 years ago, but it could have been before that. I don't remember when it was. It was a long time ago. But we did the public one maybe 8 or something years ago here in Beijing.
Yeah, great.
So yeah.
Great. Yeah. That's excellent. Yeah, fantastic.
Well, it's been great chatting to you. I don't want to take up your whole evening.
No, it's great to talk to you. Yeah, it's a trip down memory lane as well.
Yeah. Hopefully we can do this in person, and maybe we can record a follow-up in person, and we can do the actual ceremony of the Drunken Boxing podcast is drink beer while we actually have this discussion, because
Australians
that's what's supposed to happen.
To that.
All right, so we'll try aim for that at some time when I'm down there, and I'm hoping to be down there in the next year. I haven't seen my dad for quite a few years, and I have to come down and see him. So we'll
definitely catch up for the official in-person Drunken Boxing session with beers and tow. We'll get you some good Australian too.
All right, perfect. In the meantime, what I'll do is you'll send me whatever links you want made publicly for people if they want to contact you or learn more about you or even come and study with you, and I'll put them in the description and the notes of the podcast and where it's published. And that way people can get in contact with you that are interested.
That'd be fantastic, man. I really appreciate that. And it's been great to talk to you, and I've been enjoying your podcast and some fantastic guests, and I'm really grateful and appreciative that you invited me on tonight.
Well, thank you for that, but the honor's all mine talking to people like you. So I hope you have a good evening, and we'll chat soon.
You too. Peace be with you.
Okay, bye-bye.
See you.